Hello. What I want to talk about now is social history and really a different way of looking at social history. Now, in any history class, no doubt you've looked at primary documents, most commonly speeches or fragments of writing. In ancient world history, you might look at a speech or a piece of literature from the Roman period or ancient Greek literature. That's all fine. And you read those documents, and what those reading those documents closely can tell you about that culture. They can tell you about the major ideas of that day. Well, looking at the 1970s, of course, we have a new, when you get in the modern era, we have a whole new array of documents to be able to read, and one of them is television shows. And television shows can be read as a document of their time, and they are a rich document. They can tell you a lot about how that particular society, that particular place and time, what their values are, what issues are going on, what's in their environment. The first thing I want to note is right here, this link, and I'd like you to click on that. And what this link will take you to is a way to chart and a way to take notes on what you're seeing. First of all, the acronym you see on the side, the first letters are all in bold, is Persia. Now, Persia is an acronym. It's like NASA or the USA. Persia is just a way to remember the 6 major themes of the social sciences of history. And those 6 themes are politics, economics, religion, society, intellectual, and artistic. Now, for a deeper description on what each of these themes represent, you look over on the side. So for instance, intellectual, when we talk about the intellectual theme in history, we're talking about these pieces primarily: education, levels of education, philosophy, math, science, inventions, and technology. These are all derived from the intellectual pursuits or the intellectual culture of the time. We look up society. Social changes are things like patriarchal and matriarchal societies. Patriarchal, male-dominated, male-centered, or matriarchal, female-centered. How do women and children fit into the society? What are the relationships like between men and women? Is there equality, or is it, as tends to be the case in most places in history, is it more male-centered? Social class. What's it like in a society between the upper classes and the lower classes, the wealthy and the poor? Is there a middle class at all? How does that function? Lifestyle and culture. What is the lifestyle that any society aspires to? What do they value? We look up religion, is perhaps more familiar. Economics, again, perhaps more familiar, but we're talking about trade, and we're talking about money and how the economy is going. And then at the top, of course, is politics. And in history class, we tend to talk a lot about political history. The screencast above, which related about Nixon, is really about political history, structure of government, what's going on in government. Well, in a TV show, when you read a television show like a document, you can really see a lot of the different themes that are represented in this chart. And you can see what's going on in American society in many different levels here: the intellectual, the artistic, and society, religion, all these pieces. So I want to go back over here to the website. We know how to find that chart. It's here, and I recommend that actually when you are here, you go to File, Make a Copy, and you make a copy of this chart into your own Google Docs account. Now I want to ask you about 70s television. Now, if you've ever watched Nick at Night or something like that, you might have heard of some of these TV shows. For instance, The Brady Bunch. If you've ever seen The Brady Bunch or heard about The Brady Bunch, it's basically a TV show where the premise, the foundation of the show, is that you have this man and this woman who have been married before, are divorced, and they have children. The man has 3 sons, the woman has 3 daughters, and they get married, and they have a blended family. And they are the Brady Bunch, and hilarity ensues. What's interesting about that show is it's really a show exclusively of the 70s. That television show could not have existed in the 60s or before in American society, and would make really not much sense to exist today. And the reason for that is, prior to the 70s, there was not enough of a divorce rate in this country, not enough familiarity with the concept of a blended family. It just wasn't a relevant enough Certainly there were divorces and blended families prior to the 1970s, but it was not common enough that most people or a broad American audience would find that concept familiar and would watch it on television. Keep in mind, a television show, like a movie, there's no private jokes, there's no inside jokes. Anything that goes into a television or a show or a movie is intended to be understood and appreciated or laughed at or cried over by a large segment of the population. These are mass media art forms. Um, so when we look at a television show like The Brady Bunch, the fact that they structured the show around the tensions and the complications that come from having a blended family means that the concept of a blended family was familiar enough to a broad American audience to be accessible, but that the concept of a blended family was still new enough that it seemed fresh, that people would be interested to go and look at it. Which is why that show, as it was written then, wouldn't really work today. Blended families and are very common. In fact, they're extremely common. American society has, at this point, entirely adapted to many different forms of family structure. And so there's nothing new in that. That show wouldn't exist. Similarly, and I've put the clip in here, you might have heard of a show called The Jeffersons. I'm not going to play the clip in this screencast, but I would want you to, and before you do, I would just say this. The Jeffersons, the premise of the show is that you have this couple, middle-aged couple, and they have worked hard all their life, and the man and the wife, they own a dry cleaning business that has become a chain of dry cleaning stores, and they've made a lot of money. And so they are moving from what we might call middle-class lifestyle and environment, housing and group of friends, and they're now moving into the upper class. They're wealthy. What makes this show unique or gives it its comic premise is that the couple is African American. And so the show is basically premised on how they are the only African American people, the only African American couple that exist in this traditionally white American upper class world. And so in the context of the show, if you were to watch many episodes, what you would basically see is this African American couple seeming like out of place or fish out of water in the way that they behave or talk, and it seems like they are making mistakes in this upper class society, and at the same time they reveal how stuffy or uptight or superficial that this upper class white society had been or was, and so that's where a lot of the comic tension comes in the show. What I'd like you to do is just hit play on this and listen. What you'll get, this is just the opening credits. And if you watch it, think about what you're seeing. Really read it, try to read this like a document and see what this opening credit scene is really telling you in terms of the lyrics of the song, the style of the song, the imagery. At one point you'll see that there's a white doorman opening up the door to this penthouse building for this black couple to walk in. Now again, that's irrelevant today. It wouldn't be meaningful at all. But in 1970s, that image alone is very powerful. Keep in mind, in the Jim Crow era, during the 60s, the 50s, that would never have happened, certainly not in the American South. No white employee, regardless of their job or social status, would hold a door like that for black Americans. So this show really demonstrates and illustrates a lot of the changes that have happened racially in this country at that time. Now, when you're done watching the Moving On Up theme song, we'll get to really what we want to focus on today, which is the assignment. Another TV show that was very popular in this era was a show called All in the Family. And briefly, I will just say that the premise behind All in the Family is that it's a family sitcom. It's the Bunker family, primarily centered around Archie Bunker, the older man of the house. He's married to a wife, Edith. And they're really an older generation. They're a generation that would have been born in the 1930s or born into the 1930s, fought in World War II, what has come down in history actually to be called the greatest generation. Became an adult, through the 40s and the 50s. Their child, they have a daughter who was a baby boomer, and she was a hippie in the 60s, and she was young, and she and her husband, the daughter's husband, the son-in-law, whose name is Michael, he's often called Meathead in the show, he and the daughter represent kind of the new America, the younger, changed America, whereas Archie Bunker and his wife more represent the older, traditional America. Now, the comedy or the tension of the show comes from the fact that the younger people in the show are constantly reminding Archie and trying to correct him and get him up to the times, up to speed. And he's constantly coming across as very politically incorrect and saying things that, certainly by today's standards, would seem very inflammatory, incendiary. But in the context of the show, he constantly is kind of representing this older American attitude that is perhaps more conservative, more patriotic, less questioning of authority, and of course the kids represent the new post-60s America that questions everything and values new things. So when you're watching the show, what I want you to do is to use this Persian notes chart to record what you're seeing. So as you watch both the first part and the second part of this show, have this open on a tab and record what you see, what's being talked about politically. What do you see in the show that tells you what the political culture of the times were? What do you see in the show that tells you what the economics of the times were like? The religious attitudes in America were like at that time. So societal attitudes, intellectual attitudes, artistic attitudes, all these 6 elements. You want to record and take notes on what you're seeing in the show. I will tell you this show is probably the most famous single episode of The All in the Family for the reason it's a Christmas episode. And the outline of the show is simply this, that Meathead, or Michael, the son-in-law, he has a friend that has come over to the house, and he's going to eat dinner with the Bunker family. Now, what's significant about this is that this friend had left the country. He was a draft dodger. He had left the country and fled to Canada when his name got called, and he was called to serve in the military during Vietnam. Thousands of American men did this. If you did that, however, you were a fugitive from justice. You were a criminal, and the FBI would arrest you. Your name went on a list, and if you tried to re-enter the country, you were an illegal person. You were a fugitive from justice. You would be arrested. This was a crime to dodge the draft. Well, in 1976, the Vietnam War is over. 76 is when this show aired. In 1976, the Vietnam War is over. However, you still have these thousands of American men in Canada, the people who dodged draft this way, and they are still not allowed in the country. And America was considering this issue in 76 about what to do. Do we let these boys come home? Do we let these men come home? Obviously many of them wanted to return to the country and be with their family, their friends, go back to the communities they had lived in. And so there was some tension that way. A lot of people felt, however, that they had not done their duty, that they were criminals and that they should not be allowed to come back, that they had not defended the country, therefore they have lost the right to live in the country. And what happens in this episode is that there is this man there who has snuck back in the country during Christmas time to see his friends and family, and he is a fugitive at this time. I mean, it's illegal for him to be in the Bunker house. At the same dinner table, Archie has invited one of his friends, who is an older man who has lost his only son in the Vietnam War. His son was drafted, his son went to war, and was killed in the war. And so at this same dinner table, you have a conservative Archie Bunker with his friend who had lost a son in the war, sitting at the same table with the younger, more protest-oriented Michael Meathead and his friend who had dodged the draft by running to Canada. And so that becomes really what the episode's about. So obviously you can anticipate that there's some political elements in the show. But in fact, if you look closely, if you read the show closely, you'll see all 6 elements of Persia are in the show at some level. Some more than others, but really all 6 are represented. When you do that, publish your Persian notes chart that you create. Publish that and hand it in on the handed in form. That is one of the assignments for this unit. There is one other assignment that has to do with Jimmy Carter, and I'll talk about that in another screencast.